Have you ever stopped to think about how the pharaohs of ancient Egypt maintained their absolute power for generations? The answer may seem shocking by modern standards, but it was a deliberate and fundamental practice. They married members of their own family, brothers, half-brothers, cousins. Relationships that today we would consider unthinkable were not only accepted, but celebrated as necessary to preserve something the Egyptians considered sacred: the purity of the divine bloodline. The pharaohs were not seen as simple rulers. They were considered living gods, incarnations of Horus on earth, with divine blood running through their veins. And how do you keep the blood of the gods pure? Exactly, by keeping it within the royal family. This logic, as strange as it may seem to our contemporary eyes, made perfect sense within the ancient Egyptian worldview. Today, we're going to dive into the behind-the-scenes of pharaonic dynasties and learn about 5 of the most controversial cases of marriages between relatives in ancient Egypt. These are real stories, proven by archaeological evidence and DNA analysis, that reveal how the pursuit of power and divinity shaped the most intimate relationships of Egyptian royalty. Get ready, because these stories go far beyond what you see in Hollywood movies. Before we learn about the specific cases, we need to understand why this practice existed. In ancient Egypt, the concept of the royal family was intrinsically linked to religion and political power. The pharaohs believed they were direct descendants of the gods, especially Ra, the sun god, and Osiris, the god of the dead and resurrection. Marrying outside the family meant diluting this sacred blood, running the risk of weakening the divine connection that legitimized their right to rule. Additionally, there was an extremely practical political reason: concentrating power. By keeping marriages within the family, the pharaohs prevented rival lineages from emerging through marriage alliances with other noble houses. It was a form of absolute control over succession and over the resources of the richest and most powerful kingdom in the ancient world. Let's start with one of the most fascinating and powerful couples in ancient Egypt, Amenhotep III and Queen Tiye. Amenhotep III ruled during the 18th dynasty, a period considered the apex of the new kingdom, when Egypt reached extraordinary levels of wealth, military power, and cultural influence. His reign, which lasted approximately 38 years, was marked by peace, prosperity, and monumental constructions that still impress us today. But what makes this couple particularly interesting for our discussion is Queen Tiye's story. Unlike most queens who came directly from royal lineage, Tiye was the daughter of Yuya and Thuya, influential court advisors, but not of direct royal blood. This apparently would break the rule of maintaining lineage purity. Or would it? Modern archaeological studies, and even more impressively DNA analyses performed on mummies of the royal family, revealed something surprising. Amenhotep III and Tiye were blood relatives. Evidence suggests they were cousins, possibly distant cousins, but they definitely shared common ancestors. This means that even though Tiye wasn't officially of direct royal lineage, she still maintained the tradition of consanguineous marriages that characterized Egyptian royalty. What makes this couple even more remarkable is the real power that Tiye wielded. She wasn't just a decorative queen consort. Tiye had significant political influence, appearing in official documents, being represented in statues alongside her husband at equal size, something extremely rare, and even corresponding with foreign kings. Her name appears on wine jars, commemorative scarabs, and monumental inscriptions. She was one of the most powerful queens of ancient Egypt, and her consanguineous marriage to Amenhotep III consolidated a dynasty that would shape the empire's future. Now let's move to a case that's even more intimate and, frankly, more disturbing: Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun. Yes, we're talking about the world's most famous pharaoh, the one whose intact tomb revealed treasures that left the world speechless when discovered in 1922. Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun were half-siblings. Both were children of Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who tried to revolutionize Egyptian religion by instituting the cult of the god Aten. But here the story gets even more complicated. Tutankhamun was the result of an incestuous relationship between Akhenaten and one of his own sisters. This means that Tutankhamun was already born from an extremely close consanguineous marriage and then married his own half-sister. DNA analyses performed on the royal family mummies demonstrated that this practice of consecutive marriages between siblings resulted in serious health problems for Tutankhamun. He suffered from multiple genetic diseases, had a foot deformity that forced him to use a cane, and probably had a compromised immune system. His premature death at age 19 may have been a direct consequence of these genetic complications. Tutankhamun's marriage to Ankhesenamun was also marked by tragedy. Archaeological evidence found in his tomb reveals that the couple had two daughters, both stillborn, whose tiny mummies were buried with the young pharaoh. Analysis of these mummies shows severe deformities, probably resulting from extreme consanguinity between the parents. But Ankhesenamun's story doesn't end with Tutankhamun's death. After becoming a widow, she wrote a desperate letter to the Hittite king, traditional enemies of Egypt, asking him to send one of his sons to marry her. In the letter, she says something revealing. "My husband died, and I have no children. They say you have many sons. If you send me one of your sons, he will become my husband. I will never choose one of my servants to make him my husband. I am afraid." This letter shows the desperation of a queen who didn't want to be forced into another consanguineous marriage with some member of the Egyptian royal family. Unfortunately for her, the Hittite prince was assassinated on his way to Egypt, and Ankhesenamun disappears from historical records shortly after, probably forced to marry Tutankhamun's successor, Ai, who may have been her own grandfather. Now let's talk about a couple that literally changed the course of Egyptian history, Thutmose II and Hatshepsut. They were also half-siblings, a common family configuration in Egyptian royalty, but what makes this story unique is what happened after Thutmose II's death. Thutmose II was not the natural heir to the throne. His father, Thutmose I, had several children, and the most likely successor would be his son with the great royal wife. But that son died prematurely, opening the way for Thutmose II, who was the son of a secondary wife. To strengthen his claim to the throne and legitimize it before the nobility and clergy, Thutmose II needed to marry someone of unquestionable royal lineage. And who better than his own half-sister Hatshepsut, legitimate daughter of Thutmose I with the great royal wife? The marriage was clearly political. Hatshepsut brought the blood legitimacy that Thutmose II desperately needed. Together they had a daughter, Neferure, but no male son who could inherit the throne. When Thutmose II died young, after a short and relatively lackluster reign, the throne should pass to Thutmose III, son of Thutmose II with a secondary wife. But there was a problem. Thutmose III was just a child. Someone needed to rule as regent until he reached the appropriate age. That person was Hatshepsut. And here's where the story gets absolutely fascinating. Hatshepsut wasn't content to be just a regent. After a few years in power, she did something practically unprecedented in Egyptian history. She declared herself pharaoh in her own right. Hatshepsut ruled Egypt for approximately 22 years, one of the longest and most prosperous reigns of the 18th dynasty. She dressed in pharaonic regalia, including the false ceremonial beard, and was represented in statues and reliefs as a man. Her reign was marked by extraordinary trade expeditions, such as the famous expedition to Punt, and monumental architectural projects, including her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. Hatshepsut's marriage to her half-brother Thutmose II was the springboard that led her to power. Without this consanguineous union, she would never have had the opportunity to become one of the most extraordinary rulers of the ancient world, a woman who defied all the gender conventions of her time and left a legacy that still fascinates us more than 3,500 years later. Don't miss the next even more shocking cases. Click subscribe and continue with us on this journey through ancient Egypt. And now we come to the most famous and, in a way, most shocking case of all. Cleopatra VII, the last queen of ancient Egypt. Cleopatra is probably the most well-known Egyptian historical figure in the modern world, immortalized in countless movies, books, and works of art. But there are aspects of her family history that are often conveniently ignored or downplayed in popular representations. Cleopatra belonged to the Ptolemaic dynasty, a lineage of Greek Macedonian origin that ruled Egypt for almost 300 years, from the death of Alexander the Great until the Roman conquest. The Ptolemies took the practice of consanguineous marriages to a level that would make even the ancient Egyptians raise their eyebrows. They routinely married full siblings, uncles, nieces, and maintained this practice generation after generation with an almost obsessive consistency. Cleopatra was forced by tradition and Egyptian law to marry her younger brother, Ptolemy III, when she was 18 and he was only 10. This was not a love marriage, but a political formality required so that both could co-rule Egypt. In practice, Cleopatra held real power, and it quickly became clear that she had no intention of sharing it with a pre-adolescent brother. The relationship between the sibling spouses deteriorated rapidly. Ptolemy III, or rather, his advisors and regents who controlled the young king, began to conspire against Cleopatra. The conflict escalated into a real civil war, with Cleopatra eventually being expelled from Alexandria and forced into exile. It was at this critical moment that she met Julius Caesar. Cleopatra's alliance with Caesar is one of the most famous stories of antiquity. With Roman military support, she defeated her brother husband, who drowned in the Nile during battle. But the story doesn't end there. After Ptolemy III's death, Cleopatra was forced to marry another, even younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, who was about 12 years old at the time. This second marriage was even more clearly a formality. Cleopatra was already involved with Caesar and had given birth to a son by him, Caesarion, whom she declared to be the legitimate heir of both Caesar and the Egyptian throne. Ptolemy XV was practically irrelevant, a necessary figurehead to maintain the appearance of dynastic legitimacy. Conveniently, he died a few years later, probably poisoned on Cleopatra's orders, allowing her to declare her son Caesarion as co-regent. What makes Cleopatra's case particularly interesting is how she strategically used the tradition of consanguineous marriages for her own political ends, while simultaneously seeking alliances outside the family with the Romans. She maintained the appearance of following Ptolemaic and Egyptian traditions, marrying her brothers as required, but in reality was forging a completely new path, trying to transform Egypt into a power that could rival Rome through dynastic alliances with the Romans themselves. Cleopatra's ancestry is also an extreme testament to the effects of generations of consanguineous marriages. Genealogical analyses have shown that, due to the continuous practice of marriages between siblings throughout the Ptolemaic generations, Cleopatra had much less genetic diversity than would be normal. Her direct ancestors included multiple instances of siblings marrying siblings, uncles with nieces, and so on. It's a genetic miracle that she was born apparently healthy and highly intelligent, considering the genetic burden she carried. Are you enjoying learning these secrets of pharaonic dynasties? Then subscribe to the channel now for more incredible stories from ancient Egypt. The 5 cases we explored today, Amenhotep III and Tiye, Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun, Thutmose II and Hatshepsut, and Cleopatra's multiple marriages to her brothers, paint a fascinating and disturbing portrait of how power was maintained and transmitted in ancient Egypt. These practices, so strange to our modern eyes, made perfect sense within the cultural, religious, and political context of ancient Egypt. The pharaohs were not simply rulers, they were living gods, bridges between the mortal world and the divine. Maintaining the purity of this divine lineage was seen as essential to cosmic order, to the concept of Ma'at, the universal harmony and balance that Egyptians believed was fundamental to existence. But consanguineous marriages also had real and often tragic consequences. We saw this clearly in Tutankhamun's case, whose multiple genetic diseases and premature death were a direct result of generations of marriages between close relatives. We saw it in the stillborn daughters, in the health complications that afflicted many members of the royal family, and in the eventual degeneration of some dynastic lineages. Still, the practice persisted for millennia. From the first dynasties of the early dynastic period to the fall of the Ptolemaic dynasty and the Roman conquest, consanguineous marriages remained a central feature of Egyptian royalty. This tells us something profound about the strength of cultural and religious traditions and how they can persist even when they produce clearly harmful consequences. Today, thanks to modern archaeology, DNA analysis, and advances in understanding genetics, we can unravel these complex relationships and understand not only who married whom, but also the physical and health consequences of these unions. Each mummy studied, each inscription deciphered, each genetic analysis performed adds another piece to this millennial puzzle. The stories of these royal couples remind us that human history is infinitely more complex and fascinating than any fiction could create. They are stories of power and politics, of tradition and innovation, of love and convenience, of triumph and tragedy. They are stories that connect us across millennia with people who lived extraordinary lives in a world completely different from ours, but who shared the same fundamental ambitions, fears, and hopes. Ancient Egypt continues to fascinate us, not only for its monumental pyramids and golden treasures, but for these deeply complex human stories that make us question our own assumptions about family, power, and tradition. So did you already know these controversial stories of the pharaohs and their marriages to relatives? Which of these cases did you find most surprising? Leave your opinion in the comments down below. If you enjoyed discovering these curious facts and want to know even more about the mysteries, secrets, and curiosities of ancient Egypt, be sure to check out the other videos that are appearing on your screen right now. There's much more fascinating history waiting for you. And of course, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any new videos. Every week we bring new content about the fascinating world of ancient Egypt, its dynasties, its mysteries, and its extraordinary stories. Until the next video, and thanks for watching.